The sun of Leora was setting behind the crystal mountains, painting the sky in deep gold and violet. Princess Kayla stood in the grand hall, her silver gown flowing like water around her feet, but her mind was anything but calm. She had been summoned to the throne room for a royal decree, and the whispers of the court filled the air like cold smoke. The queen sat high upon her seat, wearing the crown of 10,000 years. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the chatter. For the peace of our world, every noble daughter will take a human as her mate. This is not a request. It is the will of the throne. The word struck Kayla like a blade. A human? Of all the species in the galaxy, they were the ones her people feared and resented the most. Deathworlders, dangerous, unpredictable, and stubborn beyond reason. She had heard stories of their wars, of their strength, of how they could survive, where no other could. But to take one as a mate, to share her life, her home, her body with one. It felt like chains being locked around her soul. Her lips parted to protest. But the queen's eyes pinned her in place. The court was silent, watching her reaction. A refusal would not only shame her, it would bring punishment upon her family. She clenched her fists, forcing the words down her throat. That was when she saw him standing at the edge of the room. The human they had chosen for her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the black armor of the Terran Guard. His hair was dark, his eyes sharper than steel, scanning the room with calm focus. When those eyes met hers, Kayla's breath caught. There was no arrogance, no mockery, only a steady gaze, as if he was measuring her soul. Captain Ryland, the queen announced, her voice echoing through the hall. You will take Princess Kayla as your bonded mate. You will live under the terms of our new treaty, protect her, and she will stand as your equal before our laws. Kayla's heart pounded in her chest. Equal. She had heard enough about human soldiers to know they rarely saw aliens as equals. She expected him to bow coldly, to smirk, to treat her like a prize won in battle. But instead, Ryland stepped forward, bowed with precision, and said, I accept, and I will protect her with my life. Those words should have brought her comfort, yet they unsettled her even more. The ceremony was quick, a binding of hands, the exchange of a silver crest marked with both their symbols. The court applauded, though Kayla could feel the tension. In their claps, she was now bound to a stranger from a dangerous world, and there was no way out. As they left the throne room together, Kayla kept her distance, her chin high. Ryland walked beside her, not too close, not too far, as if he understood the invisible wall between them. When they reached the outer steps of the palace, he glanced at her. You don't want this? Said, his voice low, calm. She turned. Sharply, and you do? I didn't choose either, he replied. But if we have to do this, I'd rather we don't make it harder than it needs to be. Kayla studied him for a moment. His tone wasn't mocking, it was practical, almost respectful. Still, her pride refused to soften. She looked away, focusing on the city lights below. The strange mix of alien and human ships hovering over the trade district. Her thoughts raced. This man, this human, would be in her home, in her life, every day. She didn't know his habits, his temper, his weaknesses. She didn't know if he would treat her with kindness or control. When they reached the shuttle platform, Ryland gestured for her to board first. She ignored the gesture and stepped inside without a word. The air inside smelled faintly of metal and oil, the scent of human technology. As the doors closed, Kayla felt the weight of her new reality pressing down on her. The flight was silent. She kept her eyes on the stars, refusing to meet his gaze. But out of the corner of her vision, she saw him checking the controls, his hands moving with confident precision. He wasn't trying to start a conversation, and oddly, that made her more uneasy. She would have preferred arrogance to this calm, unreadable presence. When the shuttle landed at the human garrison, the contrast was jarring. No marble floors or crystal walls, only steel corridors, dim lights, and the sound of boots on metal. Soldiers glanced their way, but said nothing, their eyes lingering only long enough to note who she was. Ryland led her to his quarters, or perhaps now, their quarters. The room was simple, A bed, a desk, a storage chest, and a small window looking out at the city. He stepped aside, letting her in first. "You can take the bed," he said. "I'll take the chair for tonight." Kayla turned to him, unsure if she had heard correctly. "You don't expect?" "No," he cut in. "Not unless you want to. This isn't a cage. You're free to set your boundaries." Her heart skipped. She wasn't used to humans being spoken of as gentle, yet here he was, offering her space instead of claiming it. She didn't thank him, not yet, but something in her chest shifted. Just a little. That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the garrison. She told herself she hated this arrangement, hated the man sitting silently in the corner. But deep down she knew the story had only just begun, and she had no idea where it would lead. The garrison was quiet at night, but to Kayla, every sound felt louder: the distant thud of boots in the hall, the hum of machines in the walls, the faint wind rattling the metal window. She sat on the edge of the bed, her silver gown a sharp contrast against the dull human furniture. Across the room, Rylan removed his armor piece by piece, each metallic click echoing in the small space. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to watch him, yet every movement drew her attention. Humans were bigger than most Lyrans, and up close. His size was impossible to ignore. His shoulders filled the room, his arms marked with faint scars. He didn't carry himself like a man showing off. He moved like a soldier who had survived too many battles. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "There are rules for tonight, and for however long you stay here." Her head turned slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Rules? From you?" "From both of us," he said, meeting her gaze. "You set yours, I set mine. No one crosses the line." It wasn't what she expected. She thought he would list commands, demands, orders she would have to obey. Instead, he leaned against the wall, arms folded, waiting for her to speak first. She hesitated not because she was shy, but because she had never been given that kind of power over a bond she hadn't chosen. "I will not share a bed with you," she said finally. He nodded once. "Done. I will not touch you without your permission." Her eyes searched his face for any hint of sarcasm, but there was none. His tone was as firm as it was sincere. "I will not be spoken to as if I am your subordinate," she added. "You're not," he replied simply. "And I will not be treated like an enemy in my own home." The words were like a challenge, but not an aggressive one, more like a warning. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt charged, like the silence before a storm. Then Rylan pulled a folded blanket from the storage chest and placed it over the chair in the corner. "This will do for me," he said. "You can sleep in your bed," she replied quickly, almost without thinking. "I am not fragile." He looked at her for a long moment before shaking his head. "This is not about fragility. It's about trust, and that takes time." Her chest tightened at the word, trust. She had been taught since childhood that humans could not be trusted, that they were dangerous predators wearing the mask of civility. Yet here he was, refusing to take what the law had already given him. The lights dimmed automatically, leaving the room bathed in a soft blue glow from the city outside. She lay back on the bed, but her eyes stayed open, tracking his silhouette. In the corner, he didn't fidget, didn't pace. He sat perfectly still, as if he could keep watch all night. A sudden crash from the corridor made her jolt upright. Rylan was on his feet instantly, hand on the weapon at his side. The sound faded into muffled voices and the heavy slam of a door further down the hall. He waited a moment, then returned to the chair. "You're safe here," he said without. Looking at her, she should have felt reassured. But something about the way he said it, calm, absolute, unshaken, stirred something else inside her. A memory of long-forgotten comfort. Of a time before politics and duty had hardened her heart. She turned to the window, telling herself it was only exhaustion making her feel this way. Yet, as the hours passed and her eyes grew heavy, the thought returned again and again that maybe, just maybe, the human she had been forced to take as a mate was not the monster she had been taught to fear. The next morning began with the sound of boots moving fast through the garrison halls. Rylan was already awake, checking his gear, his voice clipped but calm as he spoke into his cum. Kayla sat at the desk, pretending to study the datapad. He had given her, though she was listening closely. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air. Soldiers passed the doorway more than once, each carrying heavier weapons than usual. Rylan ended the transmission and looked at her with the kind of focus that made her pulse quicken. "You're not to leave this room unless I say so," he told her. Her pride rose like a shield. "You think I can't handle myself?" "I think someone's trying to kill you," he replied, without flinching. The words struck her harder than she expected. She wanted to demand proof, but before she could speak, the lights flickered, just once enough to make Rylan tense. A sharp sound came from the ventilation shaft above. Rylan's weapon was in his hand in an instant. He moved toward the door, scanning the corners. Kella's heart pounded, her instincts telling her to get away from the open space. The next moment, the glass window exploded inward as a dark, clawed figure dropped into the room. Kayla barely saw its face before Rylan was in motion, shoving her behind him. Energy bolts flashed through the air, lighting the room in rapid bursts. The intruder moved fast, but Rylan was faster. He slammed the attacker against the wall, their weapons clashing with a sound like tearing metal. Kayla saw another shadow moving at the edge of the window frame, a second assassin. Without thinking, she grabbed the heavy metal lamp from the desk and hurled it. It struck the second figure's shoulder, throwing them off balance. Rylan didn't miss the opening. He fired, sending the attacker tumbling out into the street below. The first assassin broke free. Lunging for Kayla, she had no weapon now, only her bare hands. But before it could reach her, Rylan drove his blade between its armor plates. The creature fell, collapsing at her feet. The silence after was deafening. Rylan kept his weapon raised for several more seconds, scanning every angle. Before finally lowering it, Kayla realized she was gripping his arm tight enough that her fingers ached. She let go quickly, stepping back, trying to hide the tremor. In her voice, "Who were they?" "Your people," he said without hesitation, "or at least someone who thinks you've betrayed them by being here." Her chest felt heavy, a sharp mix of anger and fear twisting inside her. "So even if I go home, they'll still come for me." Rylan's gaze didn't soften, but his voice was firm. "Then you stay close to me, and I'll make sure they don't." The words lingered between them, heavier than the silence. She wanted to tell herself it was only his duty, that it meant nothing, but as she looked at the fallen assassins, she couldn't shake the thought that without him, she would already be dead, and somewhere deep inside, that truth unsettled her more than anything else. Rylan didn't slow down until the door to their quarters was sealed and locked. His breathing was steady, but Kayla noticed the dark stain spreading across his sleeve. At first she thought it was from the assassin, but when he set his weapon down, she saw the blood was his own. "You're hurt," she said before she could stop herself. "It's nothing," he replied, pulling at the damaged armor plate. The movement made him wince, even though he tried to hide it. Kayla stepped closer, her instincts pushing past her pride. "Sit," she ordered. He raised an eyebrow at her tone, but he didn't argue. He sat on the edge of the bed, peeling off the remaining armor until the wound was visible, a long gash running down his arm, still bleeding. She fetched the medkit from the wall compartment, her hands moving with the precision she had learned long ago in the palace infirmary. When her fingers brushed his skin, she felt the heat of him too warm for a Leoran, the warmth of a deathworlder, whose body burned with constant energy. He stayed silent, watching her work, his eyes unreadable. "You risked your life for me," she said, focusing on cleaning the cut. "That's what I'm here for," he replied simply. She tied the bandage. Tighter than necessary, perhaps out of frustration, perhaps to test if he would flinch. He didn't. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, his voice lower now. "And you risked yours for me when you threw that lamp." Her hands paused for a moment. She hadn't thought about it that way. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "Quickly, I did it so they wouldn't kill me." His lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Of course you did." She hated that he made her feel as if he saw straight through her, as if every wall she had built was already weakening. She pulled back once the wound was wrapped, dropping the used cloths into the disposal bin. "You should rest," she said. "I'll rest when you're safe," he answered, his gaze following her as she moved to the other side of the room. That night, the air felt different. There was no shouting, no tension in his posture, no distance meant to remind her of their boundaries, only the quiet awareness that they had both bled for each other. Kayla lay in bed, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, telling herself this was still a forced bond, still something she would never truly accept. Yet her thoughts kept returning to the way his voice had sounded when he said he would protect her, not as a duty, but as a promise. And for the first time, she wondered what it would mean if she started to believe him. The city was alive that night, streets glowing with banners and light orbs that floated above the crowd. Music pulsed through the air, mixed with the smell of roasted meat and spiced drinks. Kayla walked beside Rylan, her gown replaced by a simpler tunic and cloak, yet the attention followed them everywhere. Humans and Lyrans alike turned to look, some with curiosity, others with judgment. The festival was meant to celebrate the new treaty, but Kayla could feel the undercurrent of tension beneath the laughter. Every so often, she caught someone staring, too long their gaze cold. Rylan noticed too, she could tell by the way. His eyes kept sweeping the crowd. They stopped at a merchant's stall where a Lyoran woman with shimmering hair greeted Rylan warmly. She leaned across the counter, her voice dripping with charm. "A Terran soldier," she said, smiling. "Strong, brave, and clearly too serious for a festival. Let me pour you a drink." Kayla expected Rylan to refuse, but instead he gave a small, polite smile. One drink won't hurt. Something twisted in Kayla's chest, sharp and unfamiliar. She watched the woman's hand linger as she passed the glass to him, her fingers brushing his. Kayla stepped forward before she realized what she was doing, sliding between them with a calm smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He doesn't drink during duty," she said, taking the glass from his hand and setting it back on the counter. The merchant raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "His mate," Kayla answered, her voice steady. "Which means I know what's best for him." For a moment, the air seemed to still. Rylan looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but he didn't correct her. Merchant only gave a small shrug and moved to serve another customer as they walked away. Rylan's tone was light, but there was an edge beneath it. "Didn't know you cared what I drank." "I don't," she said quickly. "I care about keeping you sharp if we're attacked." He glanced at her, his mouth curving just slightly. "Right, only that." They continued through the festival, but Kayla couldn't shake the strange heat in her chest. The same heat that had made her step between him and that woman without thinking. She told herself it was strategy, that she was protecting their image as a bonded pair for political reasons, yet deep down she knew it was something else entirely. The festival had ended hours ago, yet Kayla couldn't sleep. The distant hum of the garrison's power systems filled the room, but her mind was louder. She sat at the desk, staring at the small black case that had been slipped under her door. While Rylan was on patrol, when she opened it, her hands froze. Inside lay a ceremonial dagger, one carved from crystal steel, its edge sharper than light. Alongside it was a single strip of parchment written in her native tongue. "Return home," it said, "but only if the human dies by your hand." Her pulse pounded. She hadn't seen her homeland in months, hadn't walked the crystal gardens, hadn't heard the waves on the Lyoran shores. The thought of freedom pulled at her like a tide, yet the command twisted her stomach. She told herself it would be simple. Rylan trusted her now. She could wait until he slept, end it quickly, and be gone. Before dawn, no more pretending to be bonded to a human, no more whispers behind her back, no more danger from her own people. The door opened quietly. Rylan stepped in, setting his weapon on the rack. His eyes caught the faint shine of the dagger before she could close the case. "What's that?" he asked, his voice even. "Nothing," she said too quickly. He stepped closer, his gaze sharp. "Kayla," she swallowed. "A message from home. They want me back." His eyes flicked to the blade again, then back to hers. "And the price?" Her throat felt tight. She wanted to lie, to tell him it was nothing, but the silence between. then pressed the truth out of her. You. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He didn't reach for his weapon, didn't step back. Instead, he said, "Then you should go if that's what you want." The words hit harder than a blade. No anger, no accusation, just quiet. Acceptance. Kayla looked at him, at the faint scar on his jaw, at the arm she had bandaged with her own hands, at the man who had stood between her and death more than once, her fingers curled around the dagger's hilt. It would be easy. One strike and she'd be free. But the thought of him, lying lifeless before her, made something inside her twist until she could hardly breathe. She set the dagger back in the case and pushed it away. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm not going anywhere." Ryland's expression didn't change much, but there was the smallest shift, a flicker in his eyes that told her he understood the weight of what she had just chosen. The sky over the garrison was burning red with the glow of incoming fire. Alarm sirens wailed through the corridors as soldiers rushed to defensive positions. Kayla stood at the window, watching enemy ships descend like black knives cutting through the clouds. Ryland was already strapping on his armor. "Stay here, lock the door, and don't open it for anyone but me," he said without slowing his movements. But Kayla's mind was no longer the same as it had been when they first met. She had chosen to stay, chosen to burn the dagger, chosen him. "I'm coming with you," she said, her voice steady. "This isn't a festival or a back alley fight," he warned. "This is war." "Then we fight together," she replied, taking the spare weapon from the wall. He hesitated only for a heartbeat before tossing her a set of light armor. They moved through the garrison side by side, the walls shaking from the impact of enemy fire. When the blast doors opened, the full chaos of battle roared in energy bolts, slicing the air, soldiers shouting orders, acrid scent of burning metal. An enemy strike team charged their flank, moving fast. Ryland met them head-on, his blade flashing in the haze. Kayla stayed close, firing with precise bursts, each shot covering his blind side. At one point, an enemy soldier broke past Ryland and lunged for her. She didn't hesitate. She drove her blade into its side and shoved it back into the dust. Ryland glanced at her through the smoke, just long enough for her to see the unspoken pride in his eyes. Hours later, the fighting slowed. Enemy ships began to retreat, leaving smoldering wreckage in the streets. Kayla stood with her weapon still in hand, her breathing hard but steady. Ryland came to her side, scanning her for injuries. "You did well," he said quietly. She met his gaze, the world around them fading until only his voice remained. "I didn't stay because of the treaty," she said. "I stayed because without you, I am nothing but a title and a name. With you, I'm alive." Ryland didn't speak, but his hand rested on her shoulder, firm and certain. The war wasn't over, but in that moment Kayla knew there was no force in the galaxy that could tear her from his side now.